If you drive long enough down the isolated highways of South Dakota, you will eventually notice a silence that feels heavy. In the remote towns scattered across this landscape, the silence is linked to an entity locals have feared for generations: Walking Sam. He is described as a 7-foot-tall figure with elongated, spindly limbs and a wide-brimmed hat. He has hollow eyes but no mouth, and he is said to carry the silhouettes of hanging victims beneath his arms. While the stories frame him as a ghost, the specific details of his appearance, his lack of friction, his bone-chilling cold, and his distorted geometry suggest a catastrophic manifestation of extreme physics. Consider the rules of normal fluid dynamics. If you stir a liquid in a container, the friction between the particles and the walls will eventually stop the movement. But a superfluid is different. At a specific phase, matter loses all internal friction and viscosity. A stirred cup of this material will continue to rotate infinitely, never losing its momentum. Because it lacks viscosity to hold it back, the liquid can actually crawl. It will scale the inner walls of its container and defy gravity to escape. This state only occurs under extreme conditions. The substance must be cooled to within a few degrees of absolute zero, roughly -273 degrees Celsius. Achieving this safely requires massive industrial refrigeration. Any attempt to replicate this phase shift in a domestic setting is an invitation for a thermodynamic disaster. This footage was recovered from the garage of a teenage science vlogger who attempted that exact experiment last November. Using liquid helium and a modified industrial cooler, he intended to record a superfluid climbing a beaker to show his subscribers. As the temperature inside the cooler dropped toward the threshold, the liquid helium began to boil violently, releasing a thick, freezing vapor. He was unaware that by pushing the helium past the lambda point in an unsealed room, he was creating a localized physics anomaly. The boiling ceased. At absolute zero, the liquid helium entered its superfluid phase, shedding its transparency and its friction in the same instant. It no longer reflected light. It had become a pitch-black, light-absorbing void, a living shadow. The substance began to act. It scaled the vertical glass walls of the beaker, moving upward with no viscosity to restrain it. Once the fluid breached the container, the danger escalated. Driven by zero friction, it didn't pull on the workbench. It slithered across the metal surface at high speed, leaving no wet residue behind. The vlogger had unleashed an unstoppable momentum that was now expanding into the rest of the room. The shadow hit the concrete floor and branched out into dark tendrils, seeping into the microscopic cracks of the garage foundation. It reached the walls and surged upward. In this frictionless state, gravity provided no resistance to the fluid's expansion. When the absolute zero substance touched the electrical wiring, the garage lights began to pop and flicker, failing as the circuits were stripped of their thermal energy. The entire volume of the fluid eventually pooled on the ceiling. It swirled there like an inverted whirlpool, directly above the vlogger. The superfluid was no longer just spreading. It was reacting to the thermal heat of the teenager, drawn toward the only warm object left in the room. Instead of falling as drops, the fluid stretched downward in long, rigid columns, forming the skeletal geometric legs of the legend. As the shadow reached the floor, it solidified into a 7-foot-tall structure. At the top, the fluid spread along a horizontal thermal layer in the air, creating the flat, circular brim of a dark hat. Two hollow eyes opened in the terrifying mouthless face as thick white frost crackled across the dark surface. The visual profile of the urban legend had been perfectly replicated by the physics of the anomaly. Walking Sam was now physically present in the garage. A frictionless hand reached out toward the camera. The absolute zero temperature instantly shattered the lens, cutting the feed. When the police arrived, the garage was empty. No liquid remained, and the teenager was gone. The only evidence was the concrete floor, which had been polished so smooth by the superfluid that it had no measurable friction. Walking Sam is still out there, a living glitch in the loss of our universe.